Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle. The show, as you longtime viewers and supporters of FFF know, brings you the principled and compromising angle on the burning issues of the day. And I'm joined as I am every week by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to see you and our viewers and listeners. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your support. And if you're new to the Future of Freedom Foundation and this is the first time you're getting exposed to our work, come and visit us at fff.org. Richard, I thought we'd talk about the economy and the economic conditions that are facing the American people. You've got a presidential election coming up, and obviously the economy in these elections is always a big factor. You've got President Bush, President Trump. I guess it's a Freudian slip because I don't see any difference between the two of them, and for that matter, any difference with President Obama. But you got President Trump jawboning the Fed now to lower interest rates and stuff because he's getting a little bit desperate because there seem to be signs on the horizon that we might be heading into a recession, which of course would be a nightmare scenario for Trump and his supporters because they've been bragging the entire time that Trump's management of the economy has brought economic prosperity to the American people. And some of the economists are pointing to what they call an inverted yield curve and saying that this kind of portends a recession. So I thought I'd just throw this issue over to you here to tell us a little bit about what the inverted yield curve is and how you see things in an overall context in terms of economic conditions.
Well, normally the longer-term interest curve, the longer-term rates of interest are higher than the short-term. We're talking about a one-year security, a 10-year security, and a 30-year security. Those are usually the category breakdowns most frequently talked about. And that normally the 10-year bond or security is higher. It doesn't matter by how much, but higher than a year one. But it's often said that if people are pessimistic about the future and the likely profitability from investments and undertaken or anticipated and being evaluated, that means that they're more concerned about what the future holds in store, and that the longer term, that is, let's say the 10-year security, will have a rate of interest, a yield curve, less than the 1 year short term, and that seems to be an indicator. But a number of analysts have been saying that because of this peculiar situation of both the U.S. Federal Reserve keeping interest rates so nominally low and in the negative range when adjusted for inflation, and the same thing even more so will in Europe through the European Central Bank, let's say, that how to evaluate what the interest rate yield curves are telling us may not be the same as just sort of mechanically extrapolating from the past. And that sort of gets to the more general element, I would argue, is that let us suppose that the economy may be heading into a recession, which I'll get back to as concerning that probability in a moment. Is that why? And the fact is that it is fundamentally Federal Reserve policy, our central bank's policies, since the financial crisis of 2008-2009. The Federal Reserve had manipulated interest rates and significantly expanded the money supply in the 5 years or so before 2008. And we've talked about that in a number of shows, how their policies prior to 2008 had set the conditions, both in the financial and the housing markets, to bring about this downturn at that time. But once that downturn began in 2009, the Federal Reserve became panicky and expanded the money supply in the banking system immensely until today it's about $4 trillion more than it was at the beginning of that. And it kept nominal interest rates barely above zero. And again, when you adjust those for inflation as measured by the standard consumer price index, let's say, They've been in the negative range. That is, the value of the dollar that the lender pays back to, the borrower pays back to the lender, has been of less real buying power than the dollar he borrowed originally at an earlier date. Which means, from the broader perspective, that Federal Reserve policy has destroyed the price mechanism of the financial markets, because interest rates are just prices, Jacob. They're meant to do such things as tell us how much savings there are in the economy relative to how much interest in borrowing people's savings and the real resources that savings represent for longer term investment projects, and the adaptation and the adjustment of interest rates to bring those two sides of the market into balance, as with any market. At the same time, investments can have different time horizons. It could be a year, it could be 10 years, it could be 5 years, it could be 20 years. And interest rates also act as a present value indicator. That is, the profitability of undertaking investments in the longer term versus investments that would have payoffs closer to the present. So the idea is of balancing not just the supply and demand of savings with investment in general, but that the term structure of investments, how long of a period of production before a return on investment, is balanced with what is perceived as the likely time horizons that people are going to be setting money aside for savings, as savings. Now, by setting interest rates at zero, that's like, imagine a socialist economy in which you abolish the price mechanism. Without prices, how do we know what people want, what people value, what's more profitable, what's less profitable, what's a cost relative to a monetary benefit? You don't. You've destroyed the tool of economic calculation. Now, by the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates artificially so close to zero in the nominal term, they have basically destroyed the price mechanism of the financial markets. We don't know what savings is worth, and we have no way of gauging whether an investment is really profitable to undertake, given the real cost of borrowing relative to the savings in the economy. We've had no functioning price mechanism of the traditional sort in the financial markets now for 10 years. Everything, in my opinion, is likely mismatched, out of whack, distorted, imbalanced, so that at some point a recession is inescapable because of this monetary mischief and mismanagement of distorting the interest rate structures. So as a consequence, a recession is coming along. Now, people concerned with this inverted yield curve, is it going to come 2 months from now, before the end of the year, early 2020? Nobody has a crystal ball to look into that. But it is clear to me that the Federal Reserve policy for the last 10 years is setting the stage at some point for a serious correction of savings and investment relationships, the use of resources for investment purposes, and a discovering of a mismatch between a lot of savings, of a lot of supplies with demands. Now, the other element of this, which has been brought up in the press, and I think reasonably, is what is the impact of Trump's emerging and potential trade war with China or other countries. And the fact is, we live in an extremely interconnected world today, Jacob. We are in an international, a global economy. Resources come from one part of the world. The component parts are manufactured in another. They're all brought together and assembled in a third place, and then they're sent to a fourth distribution center before they actually go to somewhere else to be available to be sold to the ultimate buyers, whether they be other producers buying machinery and equipment or consumers buying our kind of goods at the end point in the stores that we patronize. Now, as a consequence of this, all of these points in the production process, these steps in the stages of production, are in different parts of the world. There are these huge internationally interconnected supply chains which ignore international boundaries. Now, we are interconnected with a variety of production relationships and activities with China. According to the U.S. International Financial Data Statistics, about 20% of all of our imports come from China. And we export to them at least about 10% of our output, approximately. These are huge now. In the one sense, Mexico and Canada are our largest trading partners, but one out of every $5 of imports coming from China, you're going to notice that if trade relations are disrupted with either tariff barriers or, as the Chinese are now doing, basically giving private companies in China instructions not to buy certain American agricultural products. That's central planning prohibition, not just manipulating the price structure in which goods enter and leave countries. If this happens, it's not that a trade war per se can bring about a traditional recession in the way we think about it, but it would disrupt immensely interconnected markets and could easily have spillover effects that would then exacerbate what is already the imbalances in the financial market. They're interconnected. And I'll just make one other observation on this point before I turn it back to you, Jacob. It was monetary mismanagement in the 1920s by our Federal Reserve at that time that set the conditions and set in motion the circumstances that eventually became the Great Depression beginning in 1929, 1930. The Great Depression was exacerbated, made worse, intensified, due to the fact that then what was the response of Congress and the President? Protectionism, dramatically raising import duties on foreign goods in the name of protecting American jobs and American industry from evil foreign competitors. And then other countries retaliating reciprocally against the United States. What was called beggar thy neighbor policy. Try to make your neighbor poor by restricting their exports to your nation, and then trying to create an artificial domestic industry and attempting to artificially stimulate exports. This was one of the ingredients that intensified the Great Depression. By the bottom of the Great Depression, international trade in real terms had fallen by 50% from what it was in 1928 and 1929. That is a dramatic implosion of import and export sectors of the economy. And now, because of the increased integration of the global networks of economic relationships, manufacturing, production, sales, resources, if that were to happen, this is catastrophic both for us and the rest of the world. This is a dangerous game that the President of the United States is playing. The Federal Reserve is setting us for a fall with its monetary policy, and the President is playing a dangerous game with threatening trade wars with other countries. It will not be a pretty sight if it really materializes.
Yeah, I don't even see it as a threat. I mean, to me, he's already waging this trade war. It's a trade war that's bankrupting American farmers, who he's then putting on the welfare dole by sending them a check, compliments of higher taxes on the U.S. taxpayers who fund these welfare doles. And I think it's important to emphasize, Richard, that we libertarians have said the entire time that this type of thing was going to be happening. This relates to the Austrian school, school that you're an expert in, Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, where when the Federal Reserve was called into existence in 1916 or 1913, libertarians then said that this is a central bank. Its purpose will be to destroy the financial system of the country, because it will be there trying to finance ever increasing government spending. And sure enough, that when the Great Depression hits, they said, oh, it's the failure of free enterprise, and that's what they teach in public schools. It's what they teach in college. But as the Austrians have shown, it was just a lie. That it was Federal Reserve monetary manipulation in the 1920s, which libertarians had warned about, that produced the roaring 20s, the expansion of the money supply. And at that time, they were still on the gold coin, silver coin standard, and they panicked that all of a sudden they had all these notes outstanding, and they were afraid that people were going to start coming into the government demanding what the notes promised to pay, which was gold coins or silver coins. So they overcontract, they cause the stock market crash in 29, but they blame it all on free enterprise. Oh, see, the failure of free enterprise. And Roosevelt uses that to revolutionize America's, not only the economic system, which he converted to a welfare state, with the crown jewel being Social Security, This is a system of mandatory charity. He also destroyed the financial system that had been constructed under the Constitution. The Constitution guaranteed a gold coin standard, a silver coin standard, and he nationalized gold coins and made it a felony offense to own what had been the official money of the country. Well, this opens up the floodgates for spending and borrowing massive debt, decade after decade. Gresham's law: bad money drives out good money. You've got gold coins and silver coins. Well, gold coins, of course, had gone out of circulation because it was made illegal. But gradually, the silver coins went out of circulation too, because they kept effectively printing more and more money to finance their welfare state and their warfare state. And in the process, you have these booms and busts. Now, they teach in these economics classes in college and so forth that the booms and busts are inherent to America's free enterprise system. Well, it's just a lie. The booms and busts are a result of these financial bubbles that the Fed pumps up. As you say, they lower these interest rates artificially. They create the incentive for malinvestments. Businesses think, oh, man, prosperity is here. Interest rates are low. I'm going to go out and borrow the money. I'm going to construct this huge building. I'm going to hire new people. And then when things shake out, they realize that it was all false prosperity, false signals. And that's where the shakeout, the recession starts. But immediately, like in 2008, instead of letting things filter out, they immediately start pumping up the bubble again. That was what the quantitative easing was about. And this has gone on for 10 years now.
Yes.
And I think it's now starting to shake out. Now, in a political context, you have this notion that the president manages the economy, that's the job of the president, to manage the economy. So in the process of doing this, he's also given the authority to start these trade wars. So as you point out, you have this perfect storm brewing. You've got the Federal Reserve that's pumped up this bubble, and they're now under pressure to pump it up even more because Trump's sensing the possibility that the shakeout's going to happen. He's pressuring them to lower the rates. They're bowing to that pressure. He's starting this trade war, which is, as you point out, like the Smoot-Hawley tariff that aggravates the problem. But all his supporters say, oh, he's done a great job managing the economy. He's brought prosperity. Now, let me tell you something, Richard, and this is a guarantee. If everything tanks, I can guarantee you that the Trumpsters and the Trumpistas and their idol, President Trump himself, are not going to say that this is because President Trump has mismanaged the economy. You see, when things are going well, he's managed it well. When things go bad, it's going to be the Federal Reserve's fault, or the illegal immigrants, or the Muslims, or some other scapegoat. But it's always going to be a scapegoat. They're never going to say, my man here mismanaged the economy with his trade war and his badgering the Federal Reserve and so forth. From the libertarian perspective, we've got to think at a higher level. It is not the job of a president to manage the economy. There should be a separation of economy and the state. Laissez-faire means let it be. Leave it alone. Let people manage their own affairs. That means a free market monetary system. One where the market determines the medium of exchange, not a central bank. We need to get rid of the Federal Reserve. And we got to get rid of this notion that presidents have the authority to start these destructive, horrific trade wars with sanctions, embargoes, tariffs, and the like. Then if we do that, we start thinking at that higher level, then we start setting the basis for a real, sound, growing economy rather than this fake artificial prosperity that comes from this bubble inflating by the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, I think that your point needs to be perhaps highlighted, if I may, and that is the idea that Trump supporters say what a great job he has done managing the economy. Notice the mentality. We need and we should have an economic central planner sitting in the Oval Office of the White House in Washington, D.C. And it isn't just Trump. What was the attitude before Trump became president? Barack Obama and his policies, even with a Republican Congress that he had to deal with, restored prosperity, began the recovery. If not for Barack Obama, the economy would still be wallowing in. Now, this is not a matter of getting the government off the economy, as you were suggesting, a separation of economy from the state. That is by just getting rid of and radically reducing taxes, abolishing, repealing regulations, reducing the size and scope of government to leave more and more of the society in the private, the arena of private decision-making and interaction. No, this is the idea that, well, he planned the right kind of jobs. He planned the right kind of expenditures. He directed people's activities in the economy in the appropriate way to bring about the beginning of a recovery. And that Trump's recovery, in quote marks, of course, according to the Democrats, is merely just on the coattails of Barack Obama's successful Oval Office central planning. Now, of course, the Trump supporters said, but it's our central planner who has gotten us into this great improvement, low unemployment and rising consumer confidence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what are the Democrats offering? His planning doesn't work. It's a lie that there's prosperity. It's a lie. It has created income inequality. What we need is our central planner in the Oval Office of the White House. We will be the good and the right and the socially just central planners, as opposed to the evil and bad Donald Trump central planner, who just serves the wealthy and the powerful. Inequality central planning versus equality central planning. Pro-business central planning versus the people central planning. But the idea that the state should be overseeing, directing, guiding, prohibiting, and micromanaging the economic and social affairs of the citizenry is presumed by all of them. The idea that the state should not be doing this, and that individuals in a free society make these choices and decisions on their own, and the state is merely the guarantor of their right and liberty to their peaceful pursuits, this has been totally lost in the social arena of political discourse.
I think you hit the nail on the head, that these people are on the same wavelength. They believe in the same paradigm, Democrats and Republicans. They believe that it is the rightful role of the President of the United States to be the manager of the economy. Now, the Trump supporters see Trump as a great leader. If we can just get somebody into office who's a great leader and then support what he does blindly and unconditionally, America will be great again. And so you've got this trade war. If Trump had never initiated this trade war, his supporters would say he's right not to wage a trade war. But when he does wage the trade war, they take the position, oh, he is doing the right thing waging this trade war. Well, the Democrats, they can't criticize him on principle, as you point out. Their only argument is, make me the president because I will be a better manager than him. And if the economy tanks, I can guarantee you that the argument that the Democratic presidential opponents are going to use is, you see, this proves that he's not a good manager of the economy. Elect me because I will bring you government-managed health care better than he does. I'll bring you your government retirement checks better than he does through Social Security. I'll bring you your government educational system better than he does because I'll be a better manager. Well, this is all nonsense, Richard. I mean, this goes all the way back to Adam Smith's famous book in 1776. This has been the cause of economic impoverishment since the beginning of civilization. Government management of the economy, government regulation, government interference. There's only one real solution to this, and that is not to get better people into public office to be better managers. It's raising people's vision to the idea that you don't want government managing the economy. You don't want government to be interfering with economic activity. This was the message that Smith was giving in 1776 in his book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. This is the message that comes through the Austrian school, through libertarianism, is that we need a separation of economy and the state where nobody in government is managing the economy. That's the root of the problem. The root of the problem in America, as well as all over the rest of the world, is that governments are managing the economy. They're interfering with economic activity. There's but one solution, and that is to stop this. And that's the key to rising standards of living, higher degrees of prosperity, not 2% growth, which is usually just inflationary growth, but real growth, where there's real prosperity that's grounded in productivity and rising standards of living.
Yeah, for those viewers and listeners who also very kindly follow FFF on the internet as well, they may recall that about maybe a month ago, 6 weeks ago, my weekly article that appears up on the FFF site was about this American economist named Simon Newcomb in the late 19th century. And he wrote an article that appeared in 1871, a lead article in one of the major news magazines of that time, called The Let Alone Principle. And what already in 1871, Simon Newcomb was pointing out, he had been a professor at Johns Hopkins University at that time. He pointed out that there was already this battle going on between those who believed that the individual could be trusted and in fact should be expected to intelligently oversee, manage, direct, and plan his own life, with merely the government the guarantor of his liberty, as opposed to others already on the American scene who wished to have a more activist government taking care of, overseeing, channeling, presuming that the American citizen needed a paternalistic overseer. And that battle has continued to today, Jacob. It's the two different visions of man and society. Do you believe that the individual, A, should be free, a self-governing, self-directing, self-deciding individual who goes about his affairs with only one requirement, that he does so peacefully and honestly? Or do you believe that the individual is irrational, cannot plan his own future, and needs to be taken by the hand and guided and overseen and nurtured and planned for by others who have the hubris and the arrogance in government to think that they know better what is right for individuals than those individuals themselves? That's the true different camps on the political scene. It has been since the ancient times. It was in Simon Newcomb's time in the early 1870s, unfortunately beginning to be revived in America after a more individualistic attitude, except of course in the Old South with that egregious institution of slavery. But even slavery was inconsistent with the ideal of the Declaration of Independence. And now it has come back again, and it continues to come back. Are individuals free and independent human beings, or are they the puppets to be paternalistically cared for by those in political power? Either or. There is no in between.
Yeah, I think a perfect example of your parental point is this trade war with China. I mean, who elects Trump to be the representative of American business? I mean, why can't American businessmen work out for themselves what they need to be protected when they transact business in China? If they don't like what the Chinese government is doing, and it certainly does a lot of bad things, subsidies, protection for domestic industries, a lot of the same things that the U.S. government does over here. Well, if American businessmen don't like that, they don't have to go into China and do business. But if they do go into business in China, they can handle their own affairs. They know what's best for their business, and if they can't strike a deal that's satisfactory to them with the Chinese authorities, then they just simply don't do business. They don't need a daddy. They don't need President Trump to be their representative. They can handle those things on their own. The other thing I think is worth pointing out is your book that you did for FFF, Monetary Central Planning in the State, which it got translated in China, ironically enough, where it's selling there now. Well, you point out that this is a socialist apparatus. It's central planning. Central planning is a core feature of a socialist system. And as Ludwig von Mises points out, central planning produces crises, or what he called planned chaos. What better term to describe the monetary system in the United States, which has destroyed what was the finest monetary system in history, a gold coin standard, that drove out all the good money, where there's irredeemable paper notes now, where the Federal Reserve is manipulating things to get things, in good shape for the political campaigns coming up. I mean, this is all the result of this mindset that government needs to centrally plan not just the economy, but also trade, also the monetary sphere, This is the root of the problem, Richard, and the solution is quite simple. Get rid of the socialism that's here governing this society.
Yeah, let me pick up on a point that you made a moment ago, and that is businessmen doing business in China, American businessmen. There is this hoopla and hysteria about the Chinese, quote, stealing intellectual property. Now, we all know that there is hacking. Just as a person can break into your house and steal your furniture, your television, there are people who attempt to break into your secure internet systems and steal private information. And that should be as much against the law, I think we would all agree, as someone who breaks your window, reaches in, opens the door from the inside, and then proceeds to clean out your house with all the furniture and your jewelry. However, this is not what really is being talked about here, as I understand it. Too many American businessmen say, but President Trump, I want to have business dealings in China. And the Chinese businessmen say they'll only go in partnership with me if I share our intellectual property information. But I want a deal, but not give it to them. Please go put pressure on them so I can do a deal without sharing things that I don't want to share. Well, I'm sorry. If you want to do business with China, you deal with the situation there. If they're asking for things that you would prefer not to share, then don't do business in China. Do open business through supply chains and manufacturers in Vietnam or Taiwan or Indonesia or some other part of the world where the negotiations will be on terms more to your liking in terms of what you have to give to get something back from the person who you want as your partner. Is it unfortunate that because of government pressure in China, no doubt, quote, private businesses in China include in the contract, you have to share certain intellectual property discoveries that you've made concerning technologies and manufacturing that we want if you want to do business with us in a particular location on the Chinese mainland. It's unfortunate, but if that's considered too high of a price, then you don't enter into the deal like anything else here in the United States. If someone doesn't give you the right facility in a negotiation, if he's demanding too large of a cut of any prospective profits to go into a partnership with you, don't you sometimes walk away from the deal because you don't consider on net it's worth it? This is no different than don't do business in China. But there's money to be made if I can only have it more on my terms. Well, that's the lie. That's reality. There are several restaurants here in Charleston, South Carolina, that I would like to go to on a more regular basis than I do. But the menu prices are rather high. So I have to make trade-offs in my budget. How often do I do business with them to have this nice meal in the nice ambiance versus spending my money in other ways? I don't need Donald Trump to go to those restaurateurs and say, you better lower those prices when Richard wants a meal, because he'd prefer to have the meal without having to meet your terms. And this is the exact same thing, Jacob. You don't want to share things, then don't enter into business with that person. Don't go crying to the U.S. government and then make other Americans bear costs when the U.S. government intervenes in various trading war ways.
Yeah, and I wonder how many of these farmers are now saying that they regret making Trump their daddy, their businessman daddy, that are now going bankrupt because of they delegated this authority to him to start this trade war, and then they end up with this welfare dole. But you know these farmers are not interested in receiving a welfare check, Richard. Before this trade war, they were producing food that was feeding people around the world, and they were self-sufficient. They were doing a service to humanity by providing food for people, and they were making money in the process. That's what a genuine free society is all about, where people are free to do that. And as soon as the daddy got involved, the political daddy, boy, those farmers are now going bankrupt.
Yes, and one other element to that, Jacob, is that Trump said, well, the Chinese will pay for the higher tariffs. Nonsense. What happens is there's manufacturing costs to make the product in China. There are transportation costs to get it across the Pacific Ocean to somewhere in the United States. And then as it comes into the entry point, the importer, the American importer, must pay that price plus the import duty. And then the importer has to decide how much of the import tax he's going to eat into his own profit margin or pass on to the consumer. At the end of the day, it's the American importer and the American consumer who pays that import tax. And then Trump heralds, we've collected these tens of billions of dollars over the last year from all these extra import duties. Yes, from Americans. And then, because the Chinese retaliate and cut off buying American agricultural goods, then Trump uses part of the import duty taxes he's collected from Americans and redistributes and transfers it to the farmers that his own policies have hurt. This is the same government taking from Peter to give to Paul and creating these dependencies where it just reinforces the attitude of the farmer that things go bad, whether caused by things in the market or from government. I expect government to bail me out.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, the notion that, I mean, giving him the benefit of the doubt, that he really believed that it was the Chinese that were paying this tax. And I think just recently he learned, no, Mr. President, you got to stop saying that. It's the American people who are paying this tax. You've sucked it out of their pockets. But yes, just as he promised to make the Chinese pay for these tariffs, let's not forget, Richard, that he also promised that he was going to make the Mexicans pay for his Berlin Wall along the southern border. That hasn't quite panned out either. It's the American people who are paying for that through the Pentagon. The money's appropriated to the Pentagon that he's now redirecting to the construction of his Berlin Wall. On that note, Richard, we got to wrap it up. Enjoyed the conversation and look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.
Yep, thanks for tuning in. Again, if you're new to FFF, come and visit us at fff.org.